They showed up with movers, laughing, hugging each other, already talking about where the furniture would go. My mother waved at me and said, "You're early." I just stood on the porch, holding the trust folder. When I told them the house was no longer theirs, they went silent. No one moved. If your own sister emptied your mother's house before the funeral, would you just stand there and watch? Or would you show her how it feels to lose everything? I'm Julia. I'm 27. I finished my master's in accounting last January after 3 years of night classes and a job at a tax office. I've lived in the same small city my whole life, in a one-bedroom apartment above a pharmacy. I didn't plan on inheriting anything. My grandfather, Arthur, was the kind of man who kept his money in municipal bonds and his feelings to himself. He was sharp until the week he died. He always let me sit with him in his study, going over bills and old ledgers, even when I was a kid. He'd let me balance his checkbook, and sometimes he'd quiz me on interest rates just to see if I was paying attention. He said my parents didn't have the patience for numbers. When he died last spring, I was the one who got the call from the hospital. I sat in his living room the next day, holding the envelope his lawyer left for me. The house was cold. My parents, Carol and David, came in an hour later, already talking about what to do with the property. I remember Mom's hands, the way she pressed her thumb into the palm of her hand, asking how much was actually left after the funeral expenses. Dad stood in the hallway, picking at a loose thread on the stair runner, and he said, "Let us know if you need help sorting all this out." They both looked at me like I was holding up a line at the bank. My sister, Megan, didn't come to the house. She called from her apartment in the city, asking if Grandpa had left any jewelry or anything fun. She kept joking about buying a convertible. I told her there was a will, and that Grandpa had left the house to me. She just laughed and said, "Must be nice." I thought the worst was over once the funeral ended, that everyone would grieve and then move on. But Mom kept texting. Dad kept showing up with boxes, saying he'd just help clear out the attic. I see now how obvious it was. Back then, I just thought they were being practical. I thought family was supposed to help. The gravel made a crunch under my tires. I pulled up to the old house at 8:15, earlier than I said I would. The estate lawyer wanted a list of what was left. I hadn't even had coffee yet. The porch looked crowded. My mom and dad stood talking to Megan, my younger sister. Behind them, 2 men in matching blue shirts hauled suitcases through the front door. One of them carried the lamp from the den, the one Grandpa always kept next to his big chair. My mother straightened her blouse, then smiled at me like I was late to a party. "Perfect timing. We'll take the master, you can have the guest room." Her voice was too loud. Dad was looking at the ground, talking to one of the movers. Megan didn't even look up from her phone. I got out of the car, folder in hand. The air smelled like cut grass and dust. Megan brushed past me on her way inside, keys jangling. "You're finally here. We'll need help with the upstairs boxes." She didn't wait for me to answer. She always used to ask me for rides, money, advice. Not today. Inside, the hallway was full of boxes with my grandfather's handwriting on them. A stack of framed pictures leaned against the wall. The movers didn't look at me. Dad said something about the lease being up on their apartment. Mom was already directing traffic, pointing movers toward the kitchen, the den, the master bedroom. I stood in the entryway, folder pressed hard to my chest. No one asked why I was there. No one asked what I needed. There was a suitcase by the stairs. Megan's initials in gold. I remembered when she got it for college. She was only supposed to be home for the weekend. She dropped her purse on the entry table, right on top of Grandpa's address book. I moved it aside, careful not to bend the pages. Mom was in the kitchen, opening drawers, pulling out plates. We'll need to buy a new set. These are all chipped. She caught my eye, then turned back to the drawer. Dad told the movers to be careful with the TV. Megan was already halfway up the stairs, her suitcase bumping behind her. She called down, "Is someone going to help me with these or not?" I set the folder on the entry table. The lawyer's letter was inside, along with the inventory list. Grandpa's handwriting was on the cover. I ran my finger over the ink. The house felt smaller than I remember. Mom walked into the living room, holding a vase. She looked me up and down, then set it on the coffee table. "Your sister's been so helpful. She's been here every day this week." I didn't say anything. I'd been at work. I'd called every night to check on things, but no one answered. Megan came back down, arms full of shoes and hangers. She dumped them on the carpet, right where Grandpa's chair used to be. Dad opened the back door and told the movers to bring the mattress around. He glanced at me, then looked away. Megan brushed past me again, her perfume sharp in the hallway. Mom started a list on her phone curtains, coffee filters, light bulbs. I went upstairs. Megan's suitcase was open on the bed, in what used to be my mother's room. Clothes were already hanging in the closet. I checked the guest room. One box of Grandpa's books and a blanket on the bed. The air was stale. There was a note in my mother's handwriting sheets in the dryer. Downstairs, the movers were carrying out the old dresser. Mom held the door for them, smiling like this was all normal. I stood in the kitchen, looking at the empty hooks where Grandpa's mugs used to hang. Megan was on the couch, texting. Dad was outside, talking to the movers again. No one asked if I wanted coffee or if I'd eaten. No one said my name. I picked up the folder and sat at the kitchen table. My hand shook a little, but I kept it steady. Megan's voice floated in from the living room. "Are you going to help or not?" Mom looked at me from the door. "We can't do this all by ourselves, sweetie." I looked at the list in the folder. Grandpa's handwriting, careful and neat. I pressed the page flat, watching the ink catch the morning light. I stood in the foyer, back pressed against the wall, arms crossed. Dad had his hand on a mover's shoulder, steering him toward the library door, but I didn't move. The men from the moving company looked between us, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. Dad's fingers flexed on the guy's jacket. He tried to make his voice sound casual. "Julia, let them through. We just want to get a few things sorted, that's all." I kept my feet planted. "This isn't your house," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him, then at Mom. She was already bracing herself, jaw set in that way she used when I was little, and she'd decided I was being dramatic. "Don't be silly, Julia. We're family. Of course it's ours. Grandpa wanted it this way." "You know that," Mom said. She stepped closer, her perfume strong and sharp. She gave a tight smile. "It's all in the will." Megan was behind her, arms folded, shifting her weight from foot to foot. She was trying to look tough, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. "Yeah, you wouldn't be cruel about it, right? We're not here to fight." "Just let Dad get the boxes," she said. I could hear something nervous in her voice, like she was trying to sound older than she felt. Dad handed me an envelope. The flap was bent, the corner torn. The label said, "Last Will and Testament" in thick black marker, like someone had written it in a hurry. He held it out, not quite meeting my eyes. "We found this in Grandpa's desk," he said. The words came out thin, like he'd practiced them. I took the envelope and felt how light it was. There were maybe 3 sheets inside. I opened it. The paper was a photocopy, no seals, no notarization, just a faint gray blur where a signature should be. The font was wrong. I ran my thumb over the bottom of the page, where Grandpa's name was supposed to be. The signature was off-center, smudged. "This isn't the will," I said. My voice was flat. I looked from Dad to Mom. "Where's the original?" No one answered. Megan looked away, her mouth pressed into a line. The mover shifted his feet, glancing at the boxes stacked in the hallway. Dad stared at the floor. Mom's jaw clenched, but she didn't say anything. I held the pages up, showing them the uneven edges. "This is a photocopy. Grandpa kept the real one in the safe, not in his desk." "You know that." Mom's eyes flicked to Dad. He cleared his throat. "We checked everywhere, Julia. Maybe he moved it before, you know. Maybe this is all there is now." He was lying. I could see it in the way his hand twisted the edge of his shirt, the way he wouldn't look at me. The air in the foyer felt heavy. For a second, all I could hear was the ticking of the old clock in the hall. "So you just decided to start taking things," I said. "Without the will, without telling me." No one answered. Megan stared at the floor. Behind her, another mover appeared in the doorway, glancing from face to face, waiting for a signal. Mom stepped forward, voice low and cold. "This isn't a fight, Julia. We're your family. Don't make this ugly." I didn't move. I kept the envelope in my hands, fingers pressed hard against the paper. "You're not taking anything until I see the real will," I said. "If you have it, show me. If you don't, you're not coming in." Dad sighed, rubbing his face. The moment stretched out, silent except for the creak of the floorboards under the movers' feet. "Fine," he said. "We'll wait. But don't make this harder than it has to be." He turned to the movers. "We'll wait in the car," he said. "Come on." They filed out, one after another. Megan hesitated, then followed Mom outside. Dad gave me one last look, tired and tight-lipped, before closing the door behind him. I stood in the foyer, the envelope still in my hand, the silence swallowing everything. I set the folder down on the side table. The manila edges were sharp against my palm. Dad looked up at me first, a flicker of impatience crossing his face. Mom sat across from me, hands folded in her lap. Megan was pressed into the corner of the couch, knees pulled tight. I opened the folder and slid out the first document. It was the will. The real one. The paper was thick, with the courthouse stamp in blue at the bottom. I laid it flat where everyone could see. Dad didn't move. I could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock, loud in the silence. "This is Grandpa's will," I said, voice level. "Certified copy. Dated. Notarized. My name is the only one on it." I waited. No one reached for the paper. Megan's eyes darted between Mom and Dad, like she was waiting for a cue. I slid out the second document, heavier than the first. It was the trust agreement, on the lawyer's letterhead. Grandpa and I had signed it 2 months before he died. I turned it so they could read the names and dates. "This is the trust. Grandpa transferred everything to me before he passed. The house, the accounts, everything." I watched their faces. Dad's mouth was tight, his jaw moving as if he was grinding his teeth. Mom's hands trembled, fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. Megan's lips parted, but nothing came out at first. "I'm sorry," I said, "but the estate isn't yours to move into." For a moment, nothing happened. The air felt heavy, like the room was smaller than before. Then Megan's voice, thin and uncertain, broke the quiet. "But Mom said Grandpa promised." She looked at Mom, not me, like she was searching for a correction. Mom's eyes stayed on the table. She didn't answer. Dad's face was red, the veins in his neck showing. He stood up too fast. The chair scraped the floor. He picked up the fake will, the one they'd shown me last week, with all three of their names written in careful blue ink. He stared at it, not at me. "This doesn't make sense," he said, but his voice was flat. "You weren't even here when he got sick." I watched him. He sounded angry, but he was looking at the document in his hands. Mom's hands covered her face. Megan shrank back, silent now. "I was here enough," I said. "Grandpa made sure everything was clear." Dad dropped the fake will on the table. It slid across the surface, coming to rest beside the real one. He didn't touch the trust agreement. "You did this behind our backs," he said finally. "You tricked him." I didn't answer. I looked at Mom. She wiped at her eyes, but she wasn't crying. Her voice was small when she spoke. "We thought he wanted everyone to have something. He told us." "He told me what he wanted," I said. "He put it in writing." No one spoke for a while. The clock kept ticking. Megan's breathing was shallow, chest rising and falling in quick bursts. Dad leaned over the table, knuckles white on the wood. "So what now? You're just keeping everything." I nodded. "That's what Grandpa wanted." He turned away, fists clenched. Mom stared at the trust agreement, not moving. Megan looked at her hands in her lap. I put the documents back in the folder. I stood up. No one tried to stop me. As I walked out, I heard Megan whisper to Mom, "What do we do now?" I kept walking. The hallway was cool and silent. I felt their eyes on my back, but no one called after me. In the garage, I sat in my car for a minute, folder on the passenger seat. My hands were steady. I started the engine, the low hum filling the quiet. I didn't look back at the house. The image of their faces confused, cornered, silent stayed with me. I let it. Dad's hands shook as he flipped through the folder. The papers made a dry, papery sound. He looked older than usual, his mouth set in a thin line. "Where did you get these?" he said, voice low but sharp. I didn't look at him, just reached out and took the folder back. "County Recorder's Office. Grandpa's lawyer." I kept it short. Megan watched me, arms crossed against her chest, pretending she wasn't upset. Her eyes darted to the movers in the hall. One of the movers had stopped outside the living room, holding a box marked China. He hovered there, glancing between us, like he wasn't sure if he should be listening. Dad noticed him, too. He waved his hand, "Go ahead," and the man disappeared down the hall again. Megan leaned in, her voice a hiss for my ears only. "You're just doing this to spite us." I didn't answer. I let her words hang there, stale and flat. I walked past her, out to the foyer. My shoes sounded loud on the old wood floor. The movers, paperwork was spread out on the table. I picked up the top sheet, the invoice. It had Carol and David listed as the clients. The date was last week. I held my phone above it and snapped a picture, the shutter sound cutting through the quiet. Megan's reflection appeared in the hallway mirror behind me. She was biting her nail, watching. Dad followed, folder still in his hand. He spoke softer now. "We've already signed the paperwork. It's done." I kept looking through the rest of the invoices. There was one for the moving van, another for storage. Everything had been arranged days before I even knew. I put the papers back down, lined up with the edge of the table. Carol's voice drifted in from the kitchen. She was telling the movers where to stack the boxes, her tone bright and fake. I could hear the clink of glass as they set things down. The air in the house felt heavy, like the air before a storm. Dad set the folder on the table, tried to catch my eye. "We didn't want you to feel left out," he said. "It was for everyone." He looked at the invoice in my hand. Megan pressed closer, her perfume too sweet. I asked Dad who signed for the sale. He hesitated, then said, "Carol and I did." Megan added, "It's not your business." I didn't look at her. I read the client names again, then turned the invoice over. There was a list of items to move, handwritten in Carol's neat, round letters. My old bedroom set. Grandpa's tools. Even the piano. I took another photo, then slipped my phone in my bag. I could feel Megan staring at me, waiting for a reaction. I kept my face blank. Dad cleared his throat. "You don't have to do this," he said. "We're all family." He sounded tired. I set the folder down. The house felt too big for all of us. Megan muttered something under her breath. I didn't catch it. A mover came back for another box, squeezing past us. The invoice fluttered when the door opened and closed. I watched the man carry a stack of old photo albums out to the truck. Dad watched, too. He didn't say anything else. I left them standing there and went to the hallway, moving slowly, listening to the sounds of packing and voices echoing in the empty rooms. The folder was still on the table, open to the page with Grandpa's signature. Megan stood by the window, her back stiff. Dad rubbed his eyes, looking anywhere but at me. Boxes piled up near the front door. I could hear Carol laughing from the kitchen, the sound thin and forced. I picked up my bag and walked outside, the cold air sharp on my face. The street was quiet, only the low rumble of the moving truck. I stood there, breathing, holding my phone tight in my hand. Mom was rinsing dishes when I walked in. She didn't look up right away, just kept stacking plates, water running too hard. There was a pile of empty boxes next to her feet. She finally turned, drying her hands on a towel. "We just want what's fair," she said, her tone even. "You know Grandpa always said the family comes first." She picked up her phone from the counter and tapped the screen. She held it out, but didn't offer it, just let me read from a distance. There were 6 or 7 messages, all to the estate attorney. Her name Mom's popped up next to each one. The first few were polite. Then a string of shorter, sharper ones. The last one just said, "We're moving in regardless." I watched her thumb hover over the glass, like she was thinking about sending another. She didn't meet my eyes. "We thought you'd let us stay here," she said. Her voice was soft. It sounded almost like a question. I looked at the texts again, then back at her. "Did you tell the movers you own the house?" She pressed her lips together. Her jaw moved a little, like she was grinding her teeth. She set the phone down. "It's all right," Dad said, standing in the door. He must have been listening the whole time. He had his arms crossed. There was a red crease on his forehead, like he'd just taken off a hat. I kept my eyes on Mom. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. The silence stretched. I could see the worry in her face, but also something else, something stubborn. "What did you say to the lawyer?" I asked. She shrugged. "Just that we should get a share. That you could stay, but we needed a place too." She glanced at Dad, then back at the floor. Dad sighed, loud. "We built this family," he said. "It's not just about paperwork." I looked out the window. The sun was catching on a moving truck parked at the curb. 2 men were sitting on the back bumper, drinking water. The living room was already half boxed up, books stacked on the coffee table, my grandfather's old chair wrapped in plastic. It all looked temporary now. "You know this isn't what Grandpa wanted," I said, keeping my voice steady. "He left the house to me." Dad shook his head, like he couldn't believe I was saying it out loud. "That's just legal stuff," he said. "Family is more than that." Mom reached for a mug in the sink, washed it slowly. I could see her hands were shaking a little. She didn't try to hide it. "We thought you'd understand," she said. "We thought you'd let us stay here, together." "That's not what you asked," I said. "You told people it was yours." Dad stepped forward. "It's all right," he said again, louder this time. He looked at me like I was a stranger. like I was someone keeping something from him. Mom wiped her hands again, folding the towel carefully. She didn't speak. Outside, the movers stood up and stretched. I watched them through the glass, feeling them waiting for a signal. I turned back to my parents. "You can stay for now," I said. "But you don't own this house." "That's not changing." Dad didn't answer. He looked at Mom, then at the door. Mom finally nodded, once, like she was resigning herself to something. She picked up her phone and put it in her pocket. The kitchen felt smaller, like the air had gone heavy. I could smell dish soap and cardboard. Nobody said anything else. I walked out first. I left them both standing there, not looking at each other. I could hear the water running again as I closed the door behind me. The study smelled like old paper and wood polish. It was quiet. I closed the door behind me, not slamming, just clicking it shut. The files were where I'd left them, my folder in the bottom drawer, the locked box in the cabinet. The key was in the mug behind the printer, exactly where Dad always kept it. My hands didn't feel like mine when I picked it up, but I kept going. I laid out the trust paperwork first. The pages were thick and cream-colored, with the lawyer's signature at the end. My name, clear as day, in the section about property inheritance. I took my phone from my pocket, lined up the camera, and started taking photos. Front, back, every page. I checked each one before moving on. The will was next. Dad's handwriting in the margin. He'd written for her, next to the lake house address. I took a picture of that, too. Receipts were in a separate envelope. Property tax payments, bank statements, utility bills. All in my name, or with my address. I laid them out in rows, photographing them one by one. There was a rhythm to it: lift, snap, lay down, repeat. My heart was steady by then. I didn't let myself think about what Megan was doing in the rest of the house. I opened my email and started attaching the photos. The estate attorney's address was saved in my contacts. I wrote a plain subject line: "Estate documents urgent." I didn't explain, just attached the files and hit send. Then I sent a copy to myself. I watched the little wheel spin until it said sent. No mistakes. I pulled up the moving company's email next. The confirmation from Megan's order was still in the inbox. I clicked reply, attached the trust and will documents, and typed a short note. "There is a legal hold on this property. Please confirm that no items will be removed until this is resolved." I left my phone number and asked for a receipt of the message. I read it twice before sending. Then I sat back in the chair. My hands were shaking, but I pressed them flat on the desk until they stopped. I heard footsteps outside the door. Megan didn't knock right away. She waited, then tapped twice, quick and sharp. "Are you done being dramatic?" Her voice was flat. She didn't open the door. I kept my eyes on the computer screen. "I'm not being dramatic," I said. "We'll settle this legally." She made a noise, something between a sigh and a laugh. I could hear her walk away, her shoes clicking on the hardwood. I stayed in the chair for a minute, listening to the quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the distant sound of Megan talking on the phone. I didn't move until the emails came back. One auto-reply from the attorney and one from the moving company. Received, will review. I gathered the originals back into their envelopes, locking the cabinet again. I put the key in my pocket this time. I left the study light on when I went out. The rest of the house felt colder. Megan's laughter drifted from the living room. I didn't look at her when I passed by. I went upstairs, shut my bedroom door, and sat on the edge of the bed. My phone buzzed once, but I let it go silent. The documents were safe. The process had started. I watched the sun set through the window, the light turning everything orange and then gray. I wondered how much longer Megan would stay, or if she'd come knocking again. The house was quiet. I didn't sleep, but it didn't matter. The emails were sent. There was a paper trail now. I had proof. Dad came in fast, his shoes loud on the hallway tile. I was at the kitchen table with my laptop open, a mug of tea beside me. He didn't sit. He slammed a stack of paper on the table. The top page was a black and white scan with my name printed in a line I recognized. Julia L. Evans, trustee. He didn't raise his voice, but he didn't need to. Why does this say Julia L. Evans, trustee? His hand flattened the paper, knuckles white. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him and said, Grandpa put everything in a trust before he died. I'm the sole trustee. Mom was in the doorway. She had a dish towel in her hand, but she wasn't moving. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The color went out of her face in a way I'd only seen once before, at the hospital, when the nurse called it. Dad's eyes flicked to Mom, then back to me. Not funny, Julia. What is this? Some kind of joke. He pushed the printout toward me as if I'd admit it was fake if I touched it. I just shook my head. I kept my hands in my lap. No joke, I said. The deed's been in my name since March. Grandpa wanted it this way. He turned to Mom, as if she could explain it. She just kept staring at the deed like it might change if she looked hard enough. Megan walked in then, phone in her hand. She heard the noise. Dad snapped, Megan, did you know about this? She shook her head, mouth tight. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down, thumb hovering. The screen lit up with a new message. She went still, reading. Then she looked up at me, her face open, confused. It's from Carla. She works at the county office, she said. She looked at Dad and Mom, then at me. House transfer filed in March. Not your names. She set her phone down on the table. She pushed it toward Dad, screen up. He read the text, hands starting to shake. Megan's hands were trembling too. I could see the pulse in her wrist. No one said anything for a long minute. The clock over the sink ticked. The fridge engine kicked on. It was the only sound. Dad sat down hard. He looked old suddenly. Mom leaned on the back of a chair. Megan just stared at the table. When Dad finally spoke, his voice was rough. Why didn't you tell us? He wasn't angry now. More tired than I'd ever heard him. I said, Grandpa didn't want to fight. He wanted the house protected. He put it in trust before he passed. I'm just following his wishes. Mom turned to Megan. Did you know about this? Megan shook her head, still pale. I only just found out. She looked at me. Why? That's all she said. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The deed was right there, black and white, my name on it. I could see the way Megan was piecing it together, how she'd always assumed things would go a certain way, how she'd never asked questions. Dad exhaled, slow. So what now? He said. I shrugged. Nothing changes. You can keep living here. I'm not throwing anyone out. But it's my responsibility now. It's not up for discussion. He nodded, more to himself than to anyone else. Mom went to the sink and ran water, hands shaking. Megan sat down, silent, her phone forgotten. I got up. I left the room. The printout stayed on the table. No one touched it. I took my mug with me. My hands were steady. Upstairs, I heard Megan's voice, small on the phone. She was telling someone, I think her husband, what had happened. She sounded lost. Downstairs, the house was quiet. No one came after me. The air was heavy with early summer heat when I stepped onto the porch. The siding was faded, but this was still my house. My phone was already in my hand. I dialed the number from the paperwork, Jefferson and Sons Moving. They'd been parked down the street, waiting for a signal. Now they were unloading boxes. I didn't recognize furniture that wasn't mine, some wrapped in blue moving blankets, half of it already stacked in the living room. I kept my voice flat. "Hi, this is MS. Walker. I need you to hold on the unload. There's a legal issue." The man in a gray shirt, clipboard under his arm, looked up at me. He was older, beard trimmed close. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. "Legal issue," he said. "Yes," I said. "The house is in my name, not the other parties. There's been a mix-up. I have the deed and a restraining order. I'm asking you to pause until this is sorted." He looked at me for a second, like he was weighing if this was his problem. I held out the file folder. He took it, turning the papers over, lips moving as he read the letterhead and my name. Through the front window, I could see my mother's silhouette. She was standing behind the curtains, arms folded. My brother sat at the dining table, hunched. My sister-in-law hovered in the hall, phone pressed to her ear. The foreman handed the file back. He gave a short nod, then turned to his crew. "Hold up, guys," he called. "Nobody else in until we get this cleared up." There was a slow ripple as the men set down boxes, looked at one another, then started pulling back. One of them shrugged, and another leaned against the railing, looking bored. A few words were exchanged in Spanish, low and clipped. I stood there, not moving. The porch boards creaked under my feet. My mother finally opened the door, but only halfway. "What are you doing?" she said, quiet but sharp. I kept my eyes on her. "The movers can't continue. The house isn't yours to move into. You know that." She glanced back into the house, then at me. Her mouth worked, but nothing came out for a second. "Your lawyer sent the paperwork," she said. "We assumed." "You assumed wrong. The paperwork was a draft. The final transfer never happened. I never signed. The restraining order stands. If you try to enter, I'll have to call the police." Her expression flickered. For a second, she looked smaller, older. The usual edge in her voice was gone. "You're going to do this to your family." I didn't answer. She shut the door again, the lock clicking. I heard voices inside, my brother's, low and angry. My sister-in-law was crying now, muffled. The movers waited, restless. The foreman stepped closer. "We need to know if we're unloading or leaving, ma'am." "We're on the clock." "You'll be paid for your time," I said. "Please wait here. I'll have an answer soon." He nodded again, not quite meeting my eyes. I took a few steps down the porch and sat on the bottom step. My hands were steady. My phone buzzed in my lap. It was a text from my brother. "You don't have to do this. Let's talk." I put the phone face down. Through the thin glass of the window, I could see movement. My mother pacing, my brother gesturing hard, my sister-in-law slumped in a chair. The house was full of things that didn't belong. I listened to the sounds outside, the dull thud of a box being set down, birds in the maple tree, the distant hum of a lawnmower. The crew leaned against the truck, waiting for orders, arms crossed. I could feel the sweat trickle down the back of my neck, but I didn't move. I was waiting, too. Inside, the plan they'd made was coming apart. There was nothing for me to say. I let them watch through the glass as I sat on my own porch, not moving, not speaking, while everything they'd tried to take slipped just out of reach. I walked back into the house, shutting the front door behind me. It sounded louder than I meant. All three of them were in the living room, Megan perched at the edge of the couch, Mom staring hard at the coffee table, Dad pacing with his hands shoved into his pockets. I didn't sit down. I stood in the doorway and looked at them, my phone in my hand. "You have an hour to collect your personal items. Anything else stays here." Dad stopped pacing. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then started again. Are you being serious? You can't just. I held up my phone and walked over. I didn't say anything, just tapped the screen and held it out. The lawyer's reply filled the top half. It was short and plain. Trust is valid. Julia is sole legal owner. Advise immediate cessation of all third-party claims. There was her name, the firm, the timestamp. I watched Dad read it, his eyes moving too fast, then again more slowly. He handed me back the phone, not looking up. He said, "You're making a mistake, Julia. You don't know what you're doing." Mom didn't move. She looked small, her hands folded in her lap. Megan stared at the wall, not at me. I said, "It's not a mistake. The trust is clear. You all knew it. The lawyer confirmed it an hour ago. I've already changed the locks. You can take your clothes, your toiletries, your things from your rooms. Anything else stays." Megan finally turned to me. Her voice was thin. "Where am I supposed to go?" I didn't answer. I looked at her, then at Mom, then back to Dad. I don't think any of them expected me not to waver. Dad's face changed. He looked older, more tired. He said, "We raised you in this house. Your mother," he gestured at Mom, "she took care of everything. You're going to throw us out." I stood still. I said, "You've all had weeks to sort this out. I gave you every chance. You tried to sell furniture that wasn't yours. You called my lawyer behind my back. That ends now." Mom started to cry, quiet at first, then louder. She didn't get up. Megan put her hand on Mom's back, but she didn't look at me. I said, "You have until the hour's up. After that, the movers will come. I'll be here." I walked out of the living room and left them there. I went to the kitchen, leaned against the counter, and waited. My hands shook a little. I put my phone down and watched the clock on the microwave. I could hear them moving around, drawers opening, doors closing, the sound of Megan's suitcase bumping against the stairs. Dad came into the kitchen, once to get his briefcase and some files. He didn't look at me. Mom passed through to get her pills from the cabinet. She wiped her eyes and whispered, "This isn't fair," as she left. I said nothing. I kept checking the time. The house sounded different now, smaller somehow. I watched as they gathered things: clothes, shoes, Megan's laptop, Dad's shaving kit. They didn't speak to each other much. There was only the sound of footsteps and zippers, and now and then a sigh. With 10 minutes left, I went back to the living room. Their bags were by the door. Dad was standing by the window, staring out. Mom was sitting on the arm of the couch, holding Megan's hand. No one tried to take anything else. The silence felt thick. I stayed quiet, waiting. The hour passed. Dad finally picked up his bag. He nodded at me, just once, and walked out. Mom followed, Megan trailing behind, pulling her suitcase. I watched them go down the front steps, past the hedge, out to the car. No one looked back. I closed the door and locked it. The house was empty, except for me. The lawyer's message was still open on my phone. I read it again, then put the phone down and sat on the stairs. The quiet was sharp and clear. I stayed there until it started to get dark. The moving truck was already half full when I stepped outside. It was strange, watching strangers carry boxes that had been in our house for years. I could see Mrs. Avery across the street, standing behind her curtain, and someone else's dog barking at the commotion. Mom was still on the porch, arms wrapped around herself. She looked smaller than usual, like she'd shrunk in the last hour. Megan sat next to her, knees pulled up, face blotchy from crying. I heard Dad's voice before I saw him, low and tense as he spoke to the foreman. They didn't want to leave, but the papers were clear. The movers had the order from the court. I had copies in my hand, just in case. Julia, don't do this, Mom said when I walked over. Please. We're your family. Her voice cracked. I remember looking at her and thinking about last year's Thanksgiving, how she'd laughed with Megan and ignored me when I brought up my job. The memory felt far away. Megan wiped her eyes and grabbed my arm. You don't have to go through with it. She was shaking. I tried to keep my own hands steady. The law is clear, I said. You need to leave. I kept my voice flat. I didn't look at Dad when he came down the steps, but I felt him behind me, close. You'll regret this, he hissed. His breath hit my ear. I didn't move. I didn't answer him. I just watched the movers, 2 men, both in faded uniforms, lifting the last heavy box into the truck. They didn't look at any of us. It was just a job for them, another house, another family. Mom started to sob. She pressed her face into her hands. I heard her say, quietly, we have nowhere to go. Megan started to say something but stopped. Dad glared at me. For a second, I wondered if he'd try something, make a scene, but he just looked at the truck and back at me. The neighbors were all out now, not hiding, but pretending to do yard work, glancing over whenever they thought I wouldn't notice. I kept my eyes on the truck. The driver waited by the door. All set, he asked me. I nodded. He closed the doors, snapped the lock, and went around to the driver's side. Mom looked up at me one more time. Her face was streaked with tears. Julia, please. We're your family, she said again, softer this time. I didn't answer. I held the papers in my hand, feeling the edge of the folder dig into my palm. Megan wiped her nose on her sleeve and looked away. Dad stood next to the porch railing, jaw clenched. He stared at me like I was a stranger. When the truck pulled away, the air felt empty. The house behind me looked different, like it belonged to someone else. I could hear Megan's breathing, sharp and uneven. I didn't look at her. The movers were gone. My parents were still on the porch. I waited a moment, then turned and walked inside, closing the front door behind me. I stood in the hallway and listened. No one followed. I could hear Mom crying, but it was muffled now. I leaned against the door and closed my eyes. For a long minute, I just listened to the quiet. The police car rolled up just as Dad was halfway down the driveway, waving his arms at them. I stood on the porch, holding the manila folder I'd prepared the night before. The blue and red lights cut through the gray afternoon, lighting up the moving boxes stacked beside me. My mother hung back in the doorway, her lips pressed tight, my brother at her side, silent. The officer stepped out, one hand resting on his belt. Dad started talking before he reached the porch. She's locked us out of our own house, he said, voice raised. Property dispute. She's trying to steal from her own family. The officer looked at me. Are you the homeowner? I nodded and handed him the folder. Inside, the new deed with my name, the trust documents, the emails Dad had sent trying to reverse the transfer, bank statements, moving invoices in my name. I double-checked every form, every signature. He took his time flipping through it. Dad kept talking, but the officer didn't look at him. My mother's face was red. She wouldn't look at me. You did all this, the officer asked me quietly. Yes. The property was transferred into my name last month. All legal. I have proof of everything. He nodded, closed the folder, and turned to my father. Sir, unless you can provide documentation that this property belongs to you, you need to leave. Dad took a step forward. She manipulated us. She forged my signature. She's not right in the head. The officer didn't react. He looked at me again. Ma'am, Do you want these individuals trespassed from the property? I paused. My brother's face changed. He didn't expect that. My mother's hands were shaking. I nodded. Yes. Please. The officer turned back to my parents. You'll have to leave or face criminal charges for trespassing. Nobody spoke. My father's mouth opened, then closed. He glanced at my mother. She looked at her shoes. My brother's jaw clenched, then he walked down the steps, not looking back. The officer stood between them and the porch. I could see my mother's eyes dart to the papers in his hand, then to the boxes, then to me. We'll come back, Dad said, quieter now. This isn't over. The officer shook his head. Not today, sir. They left without another word. I watched them go down the driveway, past the hydrangeas my mother had planted, out to the car Dad had always parked in the same spot. The door slammed. The engine started, then stopped. For a moment, I thought Dad might come back, but he just sat there. The officer waited until they finally pulled away. He handed the folder back to me. Everything here looks in order, he said. If they come back, call us. It's your right. I nodded. He got back in his cruiser and drove off. The only sound was the wind in the trees, the boxes shifting on the porch. For the first time in months, the house felt quiet. I looked down at the folder in my hands, all the proof I'd needed, all the evidence they'd left behind. Receipts with Dad's handwriting, the forged document he'd tried to pass off, the texts from my brother threatening to change the locks. Every step they'd taken, they'd left a trail. It was all in my hands now. After everyone was gone, I closed the front door and stood a minute in the entryway. The air felt heavy, like the house was holding its breath. I made sure the deadbolt was locked and checked the window by the porch, even though the police had just left. Their voices still echoed in the hallway calm, clipped, not unkind. Dee told me to call if there was any more trouble. I said I would. I walked through the living room. Boxes lined the wall, taped shut, some half collapsed from being dragged out to the curb. My brother's handwriting on the sides, his name, his wife's, the word fragile in marker. I didn't touch them. The porch light threw long shadows out front. I turned it off. There was nothing left for anyone here. The silence felt different now. No footsteps upstairs, no low voices in the kitchen. I went into the study and sat in my grandfather's old chair. The leather was cool, even though it had been warm all day. I rested my hands on the desk, tracing the grain with my thumb. The safe was under the window, half hidden by a file box. I set the folder on my lap, opened the lock, and slid the papers inside, one at a time. The trust paperwork was all there, the statement from the lawyer, the signed amendments. My grandfather's handwriting on the last page, not shaky at all. I checked everything twice, then closed the safe and spun the dial. The sound was louder than I expected. I pushed the file box back and made sure the carpet smoothed out over the safe's edge. I sat there a moment, just listening to the house. I could hear the fridge humming and the faint tick from the old mantel clock. Nothing else. My phone was on the desk, 3 missed texts from my brother, none from his wife. The last one just said, "We'll be back for the rest." I didn't answer. I got up and walked down the hall. The spare bedroom was empty, except for the faint dent in the carpet where their bed had been. The closet doors stood open, hangers swinging a little. I closed them, one at a time. The bathroom light was still on. I flicked it off, shut the door behind me. The kitchen was clean. Dee left a mug in the sink, someone's lipstick still on the rim. I rinsed it out, let the water run a minute, then set it on the drying rack. The dog's bowl was missing. I hadn't noticed that before. Maybe they took it with them, or maybe it got packed away by mistake. I checked the back door again, just to make sure. When I went back to the study, I pulled the chair close to the desk and sat with my elbows on the wood. The folder was gone, the safe locked, nothing left to do. I thought about calling my aunt, but it was late and I didn't want to talk. I just sat there, watching the dark outside the window. No headlights, no one coming up the path. For a while, I listened for the sound of their car, just in case they tried to come back. But the street stayed quiet. After a while, I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. It was just me in the house, and it was finally still. I turned off the light and let the dark settle. I didn't move. There was nothing left to say. I kept my phone on silent for a while. I'd wake up to dozens of unread messages, some from my mother, most from Megan, a few from my father, always in the middle of the night, as if that would make me more likely to answer. The messages ranged from pleading to threats. Megan wrote that I was ungrateful and cruel. My mother said I was destroying the family. My father's were shorter, sometimes only my name, sometimes a string of angry words. I blocked their numbers, one by one. The lawyer handled the rest. He sent formal letters to all of them, spelling out what the documents meant. The trust was closed. The property title was transferred to me alone, no conditions, no loopholes. The keys were already in my purse. There was nothing left for anyone to contest. Megan and my parents moved back to their old apartment across town. I heard from a neighbor that they tried to move some old furniture out of the house one night, but the locks had already been changed. There was nothing for them to take. I saw their cars parked outside once, but I didn't open the door. They left after a few minutes. The house was quiet. No more arguments in the hallway, no voices coming from the kitchen, no doors slamming. Some of their things were still in the closets for weeks. I left them in boxes by the door. One morning, the boxes disappeared. I never saw who took them. I started to sleep through the night again. I made coffee in the kitchen and ate breakfast alone. There was no apology, no last confrontation. Just silence. I didn't reach out. They didn't try again. The house was mine. 3 months later, I sat on the back porch with a mug of black coffee. The yard looked wild. Grass pushed up through the cracks, and the roses my grandfather planted had gone leggy. I watched a squirrel try to drag a pinecone up the fence. It felt quiet out there. No one had come to the house in weeks, except for the mail carrier and the neighbor's kid, who left a paper on the step by mistake. On Saturday, a letter arrived in a stiff white envelope. Certified mail. I signed for it at the door, then opened it at the kitchen table. It was from my parents, lawyer. A single page, short and dry. They had no further claim or interest in my grandfather's estate. No threats. No requests. No apology. I put the letter in the drawer next to the utility bills. The absence of noise, calls, or demands felt strange at first. Then it started to feel normal, like a window cracked open after a long winter. That Sunday, I spent the day sorting his old books. There were boxes in the closet, gardening guides, history, some poetry. I stacked them in piles. Keep, donate, recycle. Sometimes I'd find an old receipt or a pressed flower tucked between pages. I left the radio off. The only sound was the creak of the floorboards and the kettle whistling on the stove. No one rang the bell. No cars slowed down in the drive. I sat on the porch again after dark, watching the neighbor's porch light snap on. My phone stayed face down on the table. I didn't check it. I listened to the night sounds and drank my coffee, not waiting for anything. Family is supposed to protect you, not try to take from you the moment they smell money. I never thought I'd see my own brother and mother turning on me over something my father left behind. Part of me still wonders if I was too harsh, or if all I did was stand my ground like anyone should. If you've ever been in a situation like this, did you let it slide, Or did you fight back? Was I wrong to hold the line and refuse to let years of manipulation decide my future? I know some people will say it's just money, but I don't think it was ever about that. It was about respect, about who gets to rewrite the story of our family after my dad was gone. I'm not sure what loyalty is supposed to mean when the people closest to you are willing to cut you out for their own gain. If you've dealt with family betrayal or something similar, I'd like to hear how you handled it. Share your experiences in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories that don't have easy answers, you can subscribe and like. Do you think there's ever a real way back from something like this?